Picture this. A barefoot old man walks into a Twitter thread. He doesn't comment. He doesn't post a hot take. He just starts asking questions. Simple ones. Annoying ones. Dangerous ones. Are you sure that's true? What do you mean by that? Why do you believe it? At first, people laugh. Then they argue. Then they block him. Within a week, he's been mass reported, quote tweeted into oblivion and labeled toxic, problematic, or worse, irrelevant. The next week, he's banned. Welcome to the digital agora. The truth is, if Socrates were alive today, he wouldn't survive the internet. But maybe, just maybe, that's the point. Because Socrates wasn't trying to win followers. He was trying to wake people up. So what happens when the original truth seeker walks into a world addicted to noise? Let's find out. Chapter 1. The Gadfly and the Algorithm. To understand what happens when Socrates meets the internet, we must first remember who he really was. Not the marble bust in a museum, not the name buried in a textbook, but the man, the Gadfly of Athens. That's what he called himself, a gadfly, a buzzing little creature that stings the lazy horse of society, just to keep it from falling asleep. He had no fancy titles, no books, no grand stage, just questions, and an unwavering obsession with the truth. He wandered the streets barefoot, stopping politicians, poets, craftsmen, anyone who claimed to know something, and gently dismantled their beliefs like a curious child pulling apart a clock. He wasn't trying to destroy them. He was trying to liberate them from illusion, from arrogance, from the prison of thinking they already knew. But here's the twist. People hated it, because being questioned feels like being exposed. And most of us would rather be comforted by a lie than shaken by the truth. Socrates made people deeply uncomfortable, not by insulting them, but by holding up a mirror to their minds and asking, do you really understand what you say you believe? Sound familiar? Now, fast forward to our world. Imagine Socrates on TikTok. No music, no trends, no filters. Just a man staring into the camera saying, you say you want to be happy, but have you examined what that even means? Scroll. You call yourself free, but are you ruled by your own desires? Scroll. You believe in justice, but can you define it? Scroll. In a sea of dopamine loops and 7-second dopamine traps, he'd be invisible. Or worse, mocked. We are surrounded by noise, but allergic to reflection. Socrates didn't just want to speak truth. He wanted people to find it themselves, through slow, careful questioning, through real dialogue. But here, in the world of the algorithm, slow means irrelevant. Careful means boring. Dialogue means commenter turned off. Let me ask you this. When was the last time you changed your mind online? Not just liked a post, not just nodded silently, but reconsidered something you believed. Because someone made a point so gently, so insightfully, that your ego didn't even notice it was crumbling? Rare, isn't it? That's because our digital world isn't designed for philosophy. It's designed for performance. It rewards certainty, outrage, and speed. Socrates offered doubt, humility, and patience. He was not a content creator. He was a truth excavator. He wasn't building a brand. He was tearing down false idols. And yet, that's precisely why we still remember his name. So, would Socrates survive the internet? Not likely. But maybe the better question is, would truth survive without people like him? And that brings us to the real danger. Not that the internet would cancel Socrates, but that it already has. In Chapter 2, we'll look deeper. Why do people fear questions? Why did Athens kill its wisest man? And what does that say about us today? Let's follow the sting of the gadfly into the courtroom. Chapter 2, The Trial of Truth. The year is 399 BCE. The place, Athens. The charge, corrupting the youth in impiety, not believing in the gods of the state. But beneath those official words, something deeper was trembling, something harder to name. Because Socrates wasn't just on trial for what he believed. He was on trial for making others question their own. Let's be clear, Socrates never led a revolution. He didn't riot. He didn't shout. He simply asked questions. And that, was enough to make the most powerful city in the world want him dead. Why? Because questioning is contagious. And when enough people start examining their values, the foundations of society begin to shake. This was a man who challenged the influencers of his day, the sophists, those polished public speakers, who sold wisdom like a product. Socrates? He didn't charge a single coin. He said the soul was more important than success, that virtue mattered more than wealth, that a life unexamined is not worth living. You say that today at a dinner party. You'll sound profound. Say it to a room full of people whose power depends on no one asking questions. Now you're dangerous. When Socrates stood in court, he could have begged. He could have recanted. He could have said, sorry, I'll keep my questions to myself. Instead, he doubled down. He told the court, I am the gadfly sent by the gods to stir the great horse of Athens. He said, if you kill me, you will not easily find another like me. He stood alone, surrounded by men who feared the very thing he cherished, truth earned through dialogue, and they sentenced him to death. Now, pause. Ask yourself, was it really impiety they feared, or was it exposure? Socrates had this unsettling power, not to defeat you in debate, but to lead you, gently, to the edge of your own ignorance, and invite you to look down. Most of us turn back. Few leap. In a way, his trial never ended, because the instinct to silence what challenges us, that still lives. It lives when whistleblowers are exiled, when journalists are jailed, when thinkers are labeled dangerous for asking uncomfortable questions. And yes, it lives in the digital world too. Think about it. How many platforms today reward silence over depth? How many influencers offer certainty instead of humility? How many times do we dismiss, cancel, or attack rather than ask? Socrates wouldn't have survived the algorithm because the algorithm doesn't want truth. It wants engagement, clicks, outrage, speed. But philosophy waits. It unfolds like dusk, not all at once, but moment by moment. And the modern world, it rarely waits for anything. Let me share something haunting. Plato, Socrates' student, was there when his teacher drank the hemlock. He watched as the state murdered the man who taught him how to think. And Plato spent the rest of his life trying to answer one question. How do we protect wisdom from power? That question still burns today. Because while we no longer poison philosophers with hemlock, we poison them with indifference, with distraction, with algorithms that silence nuance. We think we progressed. But in some ways, we just digitize a courtroom. Socrates lives again in every thoughtful post ignored, in every whistleblower laughed off, in every young mind taught what to think, but never how. But here's the twist in our tale. Socrates died, yes, but his ideas, they spread like wildfire. In Chapter 3, we'll explore why. How does a man with no followers, no fame, and no filter change the world from shadows? And what would it look like if we lived a little more like him? Chapter 3, the virus of truth. Socrates died. He drank the poison with calm hands and a quiet smile. He didn't plead. He didn't run. He didn't rage. But he left behind something far more contagious than any speech. A method, a mindset, a mirror. Here's the irony. The very thing Athens tried to silence became the seed of Western philosophy. Plato was there, a young man with eyes full of grief and a heart set on fire. He took Socrates' questions and carried them forward, into books, into minds, into centuries. And so the man with no school, no wealth, no agenda, taught the world how to think. Not what to think, but how. That's the secret power of Socrates. He didn't give people answers. He gave them the tools to wrestle with their own. But what made it stick? Why didn't Socrates disappear like so many others? Because his ideas weren't locked in doctrine. They weren't owned. They weren't branded. They were alive. Questions like, what is justice? What makes a good life? Can we know anything at all? These weren't philosophical riddles. They were invitations. And the beauty of an invitation is that anyone, anywhere, anytime, can accept it. Even now, imagine this. You close the app, you sit in silence, and you ask yourself, not casually, but truly, what I believe, where did that belief come from? Is it still serving me? Or is it something I've inherited, unexamined? Congratulations. You're thinking like Socrates. You don't need a toga. You don't need a podium. All you need is the courage to doubt. And in a world obsessed with being right, doubt is revolutionary. Now, let's turn the camera around. Let's talk about you. You, sitting in a world louder than ever. You, swimming in opinions, clickbait, and curated lives. You, quietly craving something deeper. You don't need to go to Athens. You don't need to read Plato in the original Greek. You just need to ask better questions. Ask your friends, not what they think, but why. Ask yourself, not what you want, but what it means to want it all. Start small. Replace I know with I wonder. Replace that's obvious with let me think. Replace debate with dialogue. Socrates didn't need to win arguments. He just needed to make people curious again. And maybe that's our role now, not to go viral, but to go inward, to carry the virus of truth forward, one quiet question at a time. So, would Socrates survive the internet? Maybe not, but maybe that's the wrong question. Maybe it's not about whether he could survive here. Maybe it's about whether we can survive without him, without his spirit, his method, his madness. Because the moment we stop questioning, we stop growing. And the moment we stop growing, we stop living. Socrates didn't want followers. He wanted thinkers. He believed the mind was like a muscle, not something to fill, but something to train. And today, Most of us have minds that are overfed and underused. We consume, we react, we repeat, but do we actually think? Socrates showed us that thinking isn't a luxury, it's a moral duty, because the quality of your thoughts shapes the quality of your life. And in the next video, we'll go deeper into that very idea, why most people don't think, and how Socrates can save your mind. If you've ever felt like your mind was noisy but unclear, if you ever scrolled for hours and still felt empty, if you know something deeper is possible, then meet me there, because this journey, it's just beginning.